My name is Turgut Cankorel, and I'm a senior counsel at International Finance Corporation, or IFC, a member of the World Bank Group and the largest global development institution focused exclusively on the private sector in developing countries. Together with my colleague Ngozi, we worked alongside legal teams from British International Investment, FMO, and Swedfund, and were supported by external counsels Dechert, Clifford, and Morgan Lewis to close the project being discussed today. Some of these colleagues will help introduce the Southeast Asia Clean Energy Fund II project for this Grunin Prize Finalist submission. SEACEF II, or the fund, is a private equity fund bringing together a diverse pool of capital to provide equity for early-stage carbon transition projects in Southeast Asia. Managed by Climb Capital, a Singapore-based fund manager, the fund is an SFDR Article 8 fund and the first to combine public, private, and philanthropic capital with a specialized climate-focused strategy in Southeast Asia for investments that involve early-stage and therefore riskier projects. IFC invested $15 million in the fund, alongside allied climate partners, British International Investment, the Cisco Foundation, Australian Development Investments, FMO, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, Impact Assets, Norfund, and Swedfund. IFC's investment was both on its own account and in its capacity as implementing partner of the Finland IFC Climate Change Program. The problem that this project was trying to solve was to bring together a diverse pool of capital to de-risk early-stage climate transition projects in the Southeast Asia region with the goal of opening follow-on capital opportunities for these projects. Climate change is the challenge of our time, and the stakes are especially high in Asia and the Pacific. The region is home to 4.7 billion people, accounts for 3/5 of global emissions from power generation, and it houses many countries vulnerable to global warming. Financing for energy transition is therefore especially important for the region's sustainable development and for reducing carbon emissions globally. However, renewable energy still accounts for only a small portion of electricity output in many countries in the region. For example, renewable energy excluding hydro accounts for only 12% of Vietnam's electricity production, 10% of Indonesia's, and only about 13% of the Philippines. In order to expand renewable energy production, companies need financing. However, many early-stage clean energy developers, who are key to bringing clean power online, cannot access funding required to deliver energy at scale. This gap is largely due to the developers' high business and regulatory risk profiles and the need for deep technical expertise, which can come from focused equity platforms. Finding a solution to this challenge is not only important in Asia, but also to other markets globally, which equally need to fund their green transition.
My name is Ngozi Agboti, and I am Senior Counsel at IFC, supporting our blended finance business with donors such as the Finland IFC Climate Change Program, which invested in this project. The fund brings together a diverse pool of capital, enabling investment into riskier projects and therefore bridging the financing gap for early-stage climate infrastructure projects by providing much-needed equity capital as well as technical expertise. Southeast Asia Clean Energy Fund II is bridging the financing gap based on two elements. The first is the fund structure, and the second is the fund strategy. Let me break down each of these and why they are addressing the market challenge. First, the fund structure. The fund was set up with a dual tranche investor structure to catalyze capital from commercial investors, development finance institutions, blended finance donors, and philanthropic organizations. It is structured with two tranches of equity, in which the junior tranche investors have a first loss position, while the senior tranche investors recoup their capital contribution. This structure is helping the fund to increase the number of bankable, climate-related projects it finances in the more risky early-stage phase of development. The second is the fund strategy. To achieve its objective of financing scalable businesses in the early-stage low-carbon transition space, the fund employs a multi-pronged strategy. Early-stage focus. The fund seeks to invest in early-stage companies and projects where capital is needed the most. The vast majority of clean energy companies and projects fail at the early stages, owing to a lack of capital as well as lack of investor support. Regional focus. The fund focuses on Southeast Asia, which has less renewable energy in its electricity mix and higher projected GHG emissions compared to other economic blocs. There is a specific country focus on Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, where early-stage private equity for renewable energy projects is scarce. Energy transition focus. The fund focuses on companies and projects using globally proven technologies and robust business models that can lead to the low-carbon transition in the short term. These include both utility-scale and captive consumer projects such as solar, wind, and energy storage. But they also include distributed platforms such as energy efficiency, electric mobility, and demand-side management and grid infrastructure. Focus on measured climate impact. The fund has a climate impact mandate, and therefore, every investment is viewed through this important lens. This requires prioritizing the success of the underlying project so that it can generate significant, measurable climate impact. The fund screens projects by examining their life cycle CO2 emissions savings and using recognized methodologies. Focus on additionality. The fund focuses on the financial, regulatory, and technical additionality of its investments. The fund works with investees to bring regulatory guidance, operational improvements, carbon impact measurement, environmental, social, and governance policy and safeguard implementation, talent hiring, and fundraising. The objective is to enhance investee value, align interests with, and empower local and regional owners rather than control on deals. The fund also tracks the social impact of its investments, including jobs created, specifically women employment, women in leadership, business innovation, and number of individual clients served, including those in rural or low-income areas.
My name is Anna Bellingham and I am an associate at Dechert LLP, which acted as fund counsel to Climb Capital since 2021 throughout the process of designing and closing the fund. The lawyers' role in advancing this solution was twofold. Initially, lawyers supported Climb Capital to structure the fund and then to work with investors to incorporate their different institutional requirements into a harmonised set of provisions, which would be both aligned to investor policies and achievable within the fund strategy. The first function was led by the fund's external counsel, Dechert LLP. The fund selected Singapore as the jurisdiction for the fund, the GP, and the fund manager. The lawyers drafted the deal documents, LPA, PPM, INA. As it was envisaged for SEACEF II to operate as an Article 8 light green fund under the EU's SFDR regime, significant input was required from the fund's external counsel to ensure compliance with the EU's ESG disclosure standards. The second function was a joint effort between the investors' in-house counsels and the external counsels acting on the deal. The diverse set of investors, multiple development finance institutions, including multilateral and bilateral organisations based in different jurisdictions, blended finance donors, commercial investors, and philanthropic organisations meant that their various institutional requirements had to be understood and harmonised across the board. While this is not an unusual effort for a private equity fund closing, the climate focus of this fund and the risk profile of an early-stage infrastructure portfolio meant a bespoke exercise had to take place. For example, although most of the investors were comfortable working within the SFDR Article 8 parameters, which promote transparency in how funds evaluate their investments and measure their sustainability, investors also had their own ESG criteria and reporting standards. In order to avoid the need for a series of bespoke, highly granular reporting schedules, the parties agreed to design fund terms that incorporated the ESG objectives of the fund in a harmonised manner that are also consistent with the different ESG mandates of the various investors. The lawyers also ensured that the different tax treatments needed by the wide variety of investor types would be adequately accommodated, with the philanthropic, multilateral, development finance and private institutions, each subject to and affected by significantly different tax concerns across a large number of jurisdictions. The lawyers further ensured that specific charitability and regulatory requirements for philanthropic investors were addressed through the suite of investment documentation.
My name is Tjerk, and I'm a counsel at Clifford, which acted as counsel to the various DFIs named earlier in this presentation. The nature of this multi-stakeholder structure meant that lawyers were involved in the design and implementation stages of the project at different times. The design phase of SEACEF II was detailed, and the final structure is the result of an iterative process involving multiple stakeholders. Clifford and in-house lawyers from the DFIs got involved as and when different investors started considering an investment in the fund, and the fund closed in December 2023. Lawyers were involved from the very inception of this design phase in 2021 and played a critical role alongside business professionals. The first challenge arose because SEACEF, Climb Capital's first philanthropic fund, was not yet fully invested, so it was critical to design a structure that would allow SEACEF II to invest alongside the first fund without causing concern to its investors. Moreover, as each investor was expected to have its own risk and return profile, an innovative waterfall structure was needed to balance the rights of the first junior loss equity investors against those of the senior equity investors. It's extremely rare to see this type of bespoke return waterfall employed in fund formation. Overall, the lawyers work together to create a governance system which both creates the accountability that the investors require, while at the same time enabling a monitoring and reporting system which is feasible in implementation, which is to the benefit of all parties. Lawyers were important in drafting governance and economic mechanisms to ensure that parties are aligned as much and for as long as possible.
The nature of this unique structure was such that lawyers brought to the table multiple areas of legal expertise, ranging from specialist international law and operational expertise relevant to IFC and the other investors, underpinning both the DFI and blended finance components, specialist 501c3 incorporation and related advice to philanthropic investors, to Singapore law with respect to the fund setup, securities law with respect to the offerings of interest in the fund, climate regulation, including on the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and M&A law in respect of the fund's investments. But ultimately, private equity fund formation expertise in designing the overarching fund transaction structure was critical. Lawyers from all these areas of expertise worked collaboratively to design an innovative fund structure with an ultimate focus on environmental, social, and financial impact. And in closing this presentation, we are happy to share the impact so far created by the fund. The fund has already made 2 investments in the few months since the fund has closed. The fund invested in Mobur Technology Pte. Inc. in the Philippines. This investment supports Mobur's growth as the leading operator of EVs in the Philippines to increase sustainable transportation in the country. The investment is expected to realize significant carbon reduction over 20 years. The fund also invested in Upgrade Energy Philippines, Inc. Upgrade is a solar project developer and EPC with a pipeline of distributed and utility-scale solar projects in the Philippines. Upgrade is a woman-led and majority-owned business, and this investment marks the first equity-like instrument raised by the company after the founder's investment. The climate impact from this investment is also expected to be material over the next 20 years. Thank you very much for your time and attention.